An old woman stands at the edge of the ocean. She spent her whole life underground, fixed machines in the dark, survived a death sentence no one was supposed to walk away from, tore open a system built on lies, and now she sleeps under open sky. Then two strangers step out of the forest. One of them has a gun. What kills Juliette Nichols is not the bunker, not the war, not the architects of the apocalypse. It is a bullet that crossed 500 years from a hatred she never had anything to do with. From the deepest level of a buried silo to the mayor of what was left to an ending nobody saw coming, this is the complete fate of Juliette Nichols, and it begins with her being sent to do the one thing no one survives. Juliette Nichols is a mechanic. That is all she has ever been. She lives at the bottom of Silo 18, fixing what breaks, keeping systems running that the people above her depend on without thinking about. She is very good at it. She does not need to be seen to be essential. The work itself has always been enough, and outside that work, she is nobody. She is not political. She is not ambitious. She has no interest in the layers above her or how the silo is governed. Her world is the work in front of her, the broken thing that needs understanding, the system that needs to be taken apart and rebuilt. That instinct, the need to get inside a mechanism and understand exactly how it fails, is what makes her indispensable at the bottom, and it is what eventually makes her dangerous to the people at the top. Because at some point, she is pulled into a role she never asked for, in a part of the silo she has no interest in, and when she starts asking the kind of questions a mechanic asks, how does this actually work, and why is it built this way, the answers she finds are not the kind anyone in charge wants discovered. They send her to clean. In the world of the Silo trilogy, cleaning is not what it sounds like. It is presented as a duty. It functions as a death sentence, the one assignment that is not meant to be survived. By every expectation, including the expectations of the people who sent her out, Juliette Nichols is not supposed to come back. If you want to know what happens to the people who survive impossible things and come out carrying truths nobody is ready to hear, go ahead and hit subscribe. She survives. Juliette survives the cleaning because she is the kind of person who has spent her entire life questioning how things work before she trusts them. That instinct, the one that made her indispensable at the bottom of the silo, is the same one that kept her alive when the system tried to kill her. And on the other side, she discovers something the people in charge never intended to be found. The truth she brings back is the kind that redefines what a person is to everyone around them. Before the cleaning, Juliette was defined by what she could do, her skill, her usefulness, her ability to repair what others depended on. After it, she is defined by what she knows, and the second identity is far more dangerous than the first. A mechanic who is good at her job is useful. A person who has seen behind the structure and come back alive is a problem. Juliette could disappear. Nobody expects her to be alive. She could carry what she knows quietly and never share it. But she is not the kind of person who finds a broken system and walks away from it. She goes back. She forces what she knows into the open. That choice costs her everything she had left. She is no longer the quiet technician at the bottom of the silo. She is the person who has chosen to pull apart the most protected structure in her world in front of the people who live inside it. And a person who voluntarily does that, who tears open a system others depend on, knowing it needs to be torn open, cannot go back to what she was before. The return changes her position permanently. She chose to repair something that the people around her had not yet agreed was broken, and now every consequence of that choice belongs to her. That is the particular cost of being the person who acts first. The repair was necessary, but the one who performs it inherits a debt that no one else has agreed to share. There is a particular weight in being given a job you never wanted by people who have nowhere else to turn. Juliette becomes the mayor of Silo 18, not because she wants the title, because she acted when no one else would, and now the responsibility for what comes next has settled on her, whether she accepts it or not. She did not campaign for the position. She was pushed into it by the simple fact that she had forced the truth open, and someone now had to stand in the space she had created. The gap between repairing and governing defines her from this point forward. A mechanic understands systems, finds the fault, isolates it, fixes it, moves on. Governing requires something fundamentally different. You cannot diagnose a community the way you diagnose a machine. You cannot isolate one broken part without affecting everything connected to it. Juliette's deepest instinct is to take broken things apart and rebuild them from the ground up. The role she has been given requires holding broken things together by sheer force of presence day after day, with no clean fix in sight. Those two impulses, disassemble and rebuild versus hold and endure, pull against each other in everything she does as mayor. She is carrying a responsibility that demands patience she was never built for, making decisions with tools she never learned to use. In the final volume of the trilogy, Dust, the conflict narrows to a single impossible frame. On one side stands Juliette, on the other stands Donald. The trilogy presents both as people who believe they are protecting what matters most and whose visions of what should survive are mutually exclusive. This is not a hero defeating a villain. It is two forms of conviction colliding, each backed by its own logic, each requiring the end of the other to succeed. The question the trilogy asks is not which one of them is right. It is whose version of the future gets to exist and what a person is willing to sacrifice to make that answer hold. That tension is what elevates Dust beyond a survival story. It becomes a story about the cost of choosing, when the only choices available each demand that something else will not survive. Hugh Howey has discussed the ending of Dust as a tension between saving, building, and destroying a choice, he has suggested, with no clean winner. The trilogy closes on that framework of choice. For most readers, that is where Juliette's story pauses, and the feeling when you set the book down is that the worst may finally be over. But the reference video's transcript gives the next account a name: In the Woods. Before I go further, let me be clear. What I am about to tell you comes from a detailed retelling in another creator's video. I have not been able to independently verify what follows, so treat it as one telling of the story, not as something I can confirm on my own. And that telling changes everything. According to this retelling, the years after the trilogy are kind to Juliette Nichols. She brought her people out, survivors of Silo 18 and the remnants of Silo 17, into a world that had spent 5 centuries quietly healing while they were buried beneath it. The retelling describes grass and deer, an ocean, a sky with actual stars. They built a village by the coast. Solo and Charlotte were among them, and year after year, they chose Juliette as their mayor. Think about what that means for this particular woman. She spent decades being the person who had to carry everything, every broken system, every impossible decision, every piece of wreckage nobody else would touch. And now the retelling gives her something the trilogy never quite did: a life where the crisis is over, not a brief pause between emergencies, an actual ordinary life. She was no longer the person who stayed awake wondering which decision would kill someone in the morning. She was someone who taught a young woman to hunt and built a home with her own hands. For the first time in the entire saga, nothing was about to break. The transcript describes Elise, a young woman Juliette gave a bow to, who over 6 years of practice became the strongest hunter in the village. She took a buck cleanly, the retelling says, an arrow to the heart, the way Juliette had taught her. And Juliette told her something worth remembering: the hunt is never over. The moment you stop watching is the moment you become what something else is hunting. Hold that. The retelling describes Juliette building herself a shelter high in the trees, joking that she was working her way toward heaven, but in no rush to get there. A woman who lived her entire life inside the earth, who only ever saw the sky when she was sent outside to die, now building her home in the trees with her own hands. That is the picture the whole trilogy was working toward. A mechanic who spent her life fixing other people's systems, finally free to build something of her own. The retelling describes a warm evening where she stood alone at the water's edge, watching fishing rods bend in the incoming tide. For Juliette Nichols, according to this retelling, it was just another ordinary evening. But on the far side of this continent, something that had been asleep for 500 years had just opened its eyes, and it was already walking toward her. Now leave the coast, step back in time. The people who earned this vendetta were already gone. According to the retelling, the architects who poisoned the world, the ones a woman named Tracy aimed her dying purpose at, had been dust for 500 years before the mission she left behind ever opened its eyes. There was nobody left to hold accountable. The crime had outlived every guilty hand. But the mission was not stored in anything as fragile as a human mind. The retelling describes a capsule wired to a 500-year clock, the one that held Tracy's sister April and her husband Remy, sealed inside a steel pod while the centuries passed. When the clock ran out and the lid finally opened, what waited inside had not aged a single day: a loaded gun, a road atlas with Atlanta circled in red, and a sealed letter from Tracy. That letter, according to the transcript, began as an apology. Tracy told April the truth. The world had been poisoned. 15 people had been left in a mountain to survive until the air was safe, and everything Tracy did was to make April one of them. But in its final lines, the letter stopped being a farewell and became an order. The people who destroyed the world are in Atlanta. Find them. Make them pay. A directive sealed into steel, written for a target that would be 5 centuries dead before the reader ever woke up. The order does not expire. It does not adjust. It simply waits until someone opens the capsule and reads the letter and picks up the gun. And the people who were supposed to carry the future the 15 left behind in that mountain were consumed by the very centuries they were meant to survive. According to the retelling, 500 years of darkness stripped them of language, of fire, of everything that once made them human. 5 centuries of rationing and isolation did not preserve humanity. It preserved bodies and erased everything human inside them. All that survived was a single number 15 repeated without comprehension, howled at strangers in the dark like a war cry emptied of every meaning it once held. April and Remy, hidden in the one capsule Tracy had built, were the only intact minds to emerge from that mountain. They climbed out into daylight with a dead woman's gun and her obsolete map, and the retelling says they walked east for years. Somewhere along the way, they crossed paths with scouts from Juliette's village, who told them the people in charge lived by the coast, so they turned toward the sea. Years of walking had done to them what the mountain had done to the 15, worn away everything that was not the mission. By the end, April and Remy were no longer travelers. They were delivery mechanisms for a letter 5 centuries old. The target was gone. The mission was still running, and by the time they arrived, the journey had stripped everything from them except its final step. They were no longer 2 people with a grievance. They were the grievance. Juliette knew nothing about any of this. She had never heard of Tracy. She had no idea that a mountain on the far side of the continent had spent 5 centuries hollowing out its own inhabitants. She had no idea that a loaded gun had been sealed into a capsule and aimed at whoever happened to be in charge when it finally arrived. All she knew, according to the retelling, was that 2 tired-looking strangers had walked out of the trees, and that they looked like they had been walking for a very long time. She had no reason to be afraid of them. She had survived worse than strangers. The retelling says she did what she always did with newcomers. She offered rest and food. She told them there was no rush and that titles did not carry much weight in her village. But April had spent years walking toward this one moment. The retelling describes her asking if Juliette was the one in charge. Juliette deflected. She never liked that word. She told them they looked tired and hungry, and that was what mattered right now. But April was not asking out of curiosity. She had arrived at the end of her dead sister's map, and the only thing left inside her was the final step of a mission whose target had been gone for centuries. The bag dropped. The gun came up. The shot put Juliette in the sand. According to the retelling, Elise reacted before anyone else could. Her arrow caught April in the throat. Remy reached for the fallen gun. She killed him too. In seconds, both were dead. Juliette was on the sand, the sky above her. The retelling says she whispered to Elise, "It already is." Then her eyes closed. Step back from this beach and look at what happened. Tracy's letter was a command, precise, sealed into a container designed to survive 5 centuries without losing a word. It was an extraordinary act of preservation. But a command written into steel cannot learn. It cannot look around. It cannot recognize that the world it was written for no longer exists. 500 years after it was sealed, that command delivered itself exactly as written, and the person standing at the end of its instructions was not one of the architects who earned it. She was a mechanic who had spent her life repairing things she did not break. Every system she had ever fixed, she understood. This one arrived without warning, without context, and without a single part she could reach. The real tragedy in this retelling is not that the command crossed 500 years. It is that no one remaining in its chain could have questioned it. Tracy was dead before the letter was ever read. The 15 had lost the capacity for language, let alone judgment. April had been walking toward a target for so long that the walking itself had become the only thing she knew how to do. And Juliette did not know the command existed until it was already pointed at her chest. 4 people, 5 centuries, and not a single moment where someone could have said, "Wait." Every link in that chain was a person who could not see past what they had been given: a directive, a number, a mission, and not one of them was in a position to ask the question that would have stopped everything. Is this still the right thing to do? A command stored in steel does not ask, and a person worn hollow by centuries of purpose cannot answer. Between the two of them, the steel and the hollow, there was no room for doubt, no crack where mercy could have entered. Juliette Nichols' fate, as this retelling presents it, is not the story of a survivor who outlasted everything. It is the story of a woman who outlasted everything except a directive that could not be revised. Was her death a mercy, or the cruelest ending this story could have given her? Tell me in the comments, share this, and subscribe.